The following analysis examines the recent intersection of executive labeling and the application of law regarding the death of Renee Nicole Good. Within minutes of the event, the administration led by Donald Trump initiated a campaign to define the situation through the lens of domestic terrorism. We will look at the evidence provided, the legal standards cited by Kristi Noem, and the internal shifts within the Department of Justice that frame this moment in American politics. We begin with an analysis of a high-stakes narrative currently unfolding within the federal government. The focus is on the killing of an American citizen, Renee Nicole Good, who was shot and killed by an immigration and customs enforcement agent. In the immediate aftermath of this event, the public witnessed an all-out campaign from the highest levels of the executive branch to describe Renee Nicole Good as a domestic terrorist. This designation was made quickly, yet it was presented without providing the public with supporting evidence for such a claim.
Within minutes after the killing of Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent, the Trump administration, including Donald Trump, began an all-out campaign to describe her as a domestic terrorist without providing the public with any evidence to support that claim.
The gravity of this situation lies not just in the loss of life, but in the speed with which a specific legal and cultural label was applied. When government officials categorize an individual as a domestic terrorist, they invoke a specific set of powers and public perceptions. In the case of Renee Nicole Good, the analysis of the available video evidence suggests a different sequence of events than the one provided by the official narrative. We are looking at a clear divide between the labels used by the administration of Donald Trump and the physical evidence available from the scene of the incident. The media landscape has been dominated by the doubling down of officials like Kristi Noem regarding the status of Renee Nicole Good. During various television appearances, Kristi Noem was asked to clarify the definition of domestic terrorism and why this specific label was applied so rapidly. Kristi Noem asserted that Renee Nicole Good weaponized a vehicle to conduct an act of violence against law enforcement. This framing serves a specific cultural purpose, positioning the government's actions as a necessary response to an existential threat.
You said that she was a domestic terrorist. How do you define domestic terrorist?
She weaponized her vehicle to conduct an act of violence against a law enforcement officer and the public. They are doing that.
How can you assert with certainty that she was trying to hurt the officer as opposed to she was trying to flee the scene?
If you look at what the definition of domestic terrorism is, it completely fits the situation on the ground.
However, the analysis of the video on the ground shows that Renee Nicole Good was steering the vehicle away from the officer. The tires were turned away before the officer opened fire. Despite this, the narrative from Kristi Noem remained fixed. This suggests a disconnect between the recorded reality and the political messaging. The sources indicate that Kristi Noem may be operating as a puppet, following the directions of Stephen Miller, who is described as running the Department of Homeland Security.
Well, she's not really running anything, let's be real. She is a complete puppet, and Corey Lewandowski is running the Department of Homeland Security. Actually, he's following directions of Stephen Miller, who is running it.
This deconstruction reveals a structure where the narrative is decided upon before the evidence is fully reviewed. The conclusion reached by Donald Trump, Kristi Noem, J.D. Vance, and Stephen Miller was that the officer was acting within his rights, despite the officer shooting a moving vehicle and striking Renee Nicole Good 3 times in the head. To understand the logic of the administration, we must look at the direct focus of Donald Trump. According to the sources, Donald Trump has been specifically focused on the context of situations on the ground. Donald Trump has stated that when the government is operating, it should not pick and choose which situations to enforce. This stated focus on equal enforcement is a central pillar of the public messaging from Donald Trump. The sources highlight that Donald Trump emphasizes the importance of the situation those officers are in. The administration argues that when people are putting hands on officers or using weapons to harm them, those officers have the authority to make arrests. The primary source material indicates that Donald Trump intends for the law to be applied based on the full context of the situation. This leads to a complex dynamic when comparing the treatment of different groups. While the administration describes Renee Nicole Good as a domestic terrorist for her actions involving a vehicle, Donald Trump simultaneously took the action of pardoning every single person involved in a different set of attacks on law enforcement officers.
The president pardoned every single one of those people.
And make sure that they're getting justice for their actions going forward.
President Trump pardoned every single one of those people.
And every single one of these investigations comes in the full context of the situation on the ground. And that's one thing that President Trump has been so focused on, is making sure that when we're out there, we don't pick and choose which situations.
There is a significant tension between the law as written, the power exercised by the executive branch, and the reality of the situation on the ground. The definition of domestic terrorism used by Kristi Noem is an act of violence against a law enforcement officer. However, the reality shown in the video analysis of Renee Nicole Good suggests that Renee Nicole Good was attempting to flee rather than conduct an act of violence. If Renee Nicole Good were trying to use the car as a weapon, the question remains as to why Renee Nicole Good backed up and turned the steering wheel away from the officer. The power of the executive branch is further demonstrated by the standard of qualified immunity. Under the current legal framework, an officer is often immune from liability if the officer subjectively believes that the officer was at risk. This subjective standard allows for a broad range of actions to be protected, even if a reasonable observer might see the situation differently. The reality of the killing of Renee Nicole Good involves rogue officers in masks, described as totally militarized, who are perceived as terrorizing communities.
Because in some cases, yes, they should have qualified immunity. But in this particular case, where you have these rogue officers in masks, totally militarized, absolutely demonizing and terrorizing cities and communities all around the country, separate and apart from whether they're immigrant communities or not, Americans. Nicole Good is Renee Good is an American.
This is a far cry from the idealism of the rule of law, representing instead a system where subjective belief overrides objective evidence. The timing of these events and the labels used suggest a political motive tied to the broader strategy of Donald Trump. The sources suggest that the criminal justice system is being used as a political tool. This is compared to a playbook used by Vladimir Putin, where the law is applied selectively to protect allies and target perceived enemies. The all-out campaign to label Renee Nicole Good a domestic terrorist serves to shield the administration from the political damage that might arise from an investigation into the shooting of an American citizen. Furthermore, the legal pressure on the administration and the focus on political prosecutions create a climate where the government may feel the need to sweep certain incidents under the rug. The motive to avoid politically damaging headlines leads to what is described as the definition of unequal prosecution. By pardoning those who attacked officers in one context while demonizing Renee Nicole Good in another, Donald Trump and his lackeys are seen as prioritizing political bidding over the consistent application of justice. This is described as a step away from democracy and toward a system where the law is a tool for those in power. The sources provide a brief but telling glimpse into the economic motives that may be influencing the broader geopolitical strategy of Donald Trump. There is mention of Donald Trump speaking to oil companies that are moving into Venezuela. This interaction is noted as occurring before Donald Trump informs Congress, a move that is compared to the actions of oligarchs in Russia. This suggests that while the public narrative focuses on domestic terrorism and law enforcement, there are underlying economic interests involving global resources and high-level corporate interactions. The use of the criminal justice system as a political tool can often be a screen for these deeper economic maneuvers. When the expertise of the Department of Justice is purged, it may not only be to silence political opposition, but also to remove the oversight that would typically govern these types of international economic deals. The dialogue within the sources reveals a deep concern regarding the state of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice. Experts note that these institutions have been essentially gutted. Decades of experience in critical areas such as counterterrorism, counter-cyber, counter-sex trafficking, and counter-drug cartels have been lost. This expertise was purged because the individuals holding it were those who believed in the rule of law. One expert points out that senior leaders in major United States attorneys' offices across the country are now focused on the political prosecutions favored by Donald Trump. The hollowing out of the Justice Department is described as a politically risky move. When major events occur, the first question is usually what the FBI and the Justice Department knew and what they did to prevent it. With the loss of experienced personnel, the ability of these institutions to function effectively is compromised. The sources mentioned that even the number 2 official in the Eastern District of Virginia recently quit or was fired, further highlighting the instability within the legal system. From a perspective of legal realism, the case of Renee Nicole Good highlights the flaws in the current standard of qualified immunity. There is a legislative effort mentioned in the sources to change this to an objective standard. An objective standard would ask what a reasonable officer should have done in that specific situation, rather than relying on what the officer subjectively believed in the blink of an eye. The current system allows for garbage investigations where the FBI is seen as sweeping politically damaging facts under the rug. If the law allows for immunity based on a subjective feeling of risk, it becomes nearly impossible to hold officers accountable, even when video evidence contradicts their claims. The sources argue that Renee Nicole Good, as an American citizen, deserves a system that relies on objective reality. The militarization of law enforcement and the use of masks by officers further complicate the ability to achieve a transparent legal outcome. When we evaluate the past promises of Donald Trump against the actual results, a clear contradiction emerges. Donald Trump and Kristi Noem claim that the administration is enforcing all laws equally and is focused on justice for the actions of individuals. However, the outcome of the pardons for those who physically attacked law enforcement officers stands in direct opposition to the treatment of Renee Nicole Good. Kristi Noem asserted that the definition of domestic terrorism fits the situation of Renee Nicole Good because it was an act of violence against an officer. Yet, when shown video of undisputed proof and evidence of people attacking officers, Kristi Noem had to reconcile the fact that Donald Trump pardoned every single one of those individuals. This shows that the performance of the administration does not match the rhetoric of equal enforcement. The outcome is a system that picks and chooses based on political alignment rather than the nature of the act itself. This is what the sources describe as bananas and against all standard protocols of the Department of Justice. The impact of these actions extends beyond the individual case of Renee Nicole Good. The hollowing out of the Department of Justice and the purging of experts who believe in the rule of law will cause real damage to the national security of the United States. This is not a situation that will remain isolated. It is described as something that will eventually have consequences for the entire country. As Kristi Noem remains a prominent figure in these justifications, the sources suggest she should be placed under oath before Congress to answer for the discrepancies in her public statements. Kristi Noem admitted to speaking with supervisors and officers directly, which is a departure from the standard roles of the Office of the Inspector General or the Department of Justice. The consequences of playing with volatile international, domestic, and economic issues in such an unusual way remain to be seen. While Donald Trump has shown an ability to persevere through political pressure, the exposure of the country to these hollowing out effects is a reality that the public must now confront. The standard of the rule of law is under significant strain, and the future of its stability remains uncertain. The death of Renee Nicole Good serves as a focal point for a much larger discussion about executive power and the selective application of the law. The administration of Donald Trump moved quickly to apply the label of domestic terrorist, a move that Kristi Noem defended despite conflicting video evidence. The analysis reveals a Department of Justice that has been purged of its most experienced counterterrorism and counter-trafficking experts, replaced by a focus on political objectives. The definition of domestic terrorism used by Kristi Noem, acts of violence against law enforcement, was not applied to those whom Donald Trump chose to pardon, even when those individuals were caught on video attacking officers. This indicates that the context Donald Trump focuses on is often a political one. The shift toward a subjective standard of qualified immunity further protects this selective enforcement, while legislative attempts seek to return to an objective, reasonable officer standard. The involvement of figures like Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance in supporting these narratives suggests a coordinated effort to frame the actions of the administration as being in line with the law, even as the institutions tasked with upholding that law are being systematically weakened. The potential impact on national security and the integrity of the American criminal justice system is a central concern highlighted by the experts in the sources. The case of Renee Nicole Good is a reminder of the power of labels and the importance of evidence. When the government decides the conclusion before seeing the video, the rule of law is replaced by a different kind of authority. As the Justice Department continues to deal with the fallout of these purges and the focus on document production for cases like that of Epstein, the ability of the government to provide equal justice remains under question. The sources make it clear that the current path involves significant risk. The hollowing out of expertise and the use of the law as a political tool are described as the first steps away from a functioning democracy. Whether the system will snap back to the rule of law is a question that remains unanswered, but the evidence of the current direction is documented in the actions and statements of Donald Trump, Kristi Noem, and the administrative shifts within the FBI and DOJ. The focus remains on the evidence. The video shows Renee Nicole Good turning the tires away. The law says domestic terrorism is an act of violence. The administration says both are true, but the pardons tell a different story. This is the reality of the political and legal landscape as described by the sources. The consequences are real, the damage to the institutions is documented, and the impact on the country is a matter of ongoing concern for those who value the objective application of the law. In closing, we have examined the specific claims made by the administration of Donald Trump regarding the death of Renee Nicole Good. We have deconstructed the definitions provided by Kristi Noem and contrasted them with the physical evidence on the ground. We have also explored the internal changes within the Department of Justice and the loss of counterterrorism expertise that has occurred during this period. The sources indicate a pattern of selective enforcement and the use of the executive branch's narrative-setting power to define events in a way that serves political motives. The comparison to foreign political playbooks, such as that of Vladimir Putin, suggests a shift in how the American criminal justice system is being utilized. The hollowing out of the FBI and DOJ is not just a personnel change, but a fundamental shift in the priorities of the government. The standard of qualified immunity and the move toward an objective legal standard remain key areas of conflict. As the public and Congress look for answers, the role of figures like Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller in directing these narratives will likely remain a point of intense scrutiny. The ability of the country to maintain the rule of law depends on the consistency of its application, a consistency that is currently being challenged by the actions and pardons of Donald Trump. The situation surrounding Renee Nicole Good is more than just a single incident. It is a symptom of a broader change in the relationship between power, law, and reality. The sharp news anchor tone of this analysis is intended to provide clarity on these complex issues, relying strictly on the evidence and dialogue provided in the sources. The ultimate consequences of these shifts will be felt for years to come, as the expertise and protocols of the nation's highest legal institutions are reshaped. This concludes the analysis of the recent developments regarding the Trump administration's handling of law enforcement and domestic labels. The evidence remains the primary guide in understanding the divide between official statements and the reality on the ground. The impact on American democracy and the national security infrastructure continues to be the most significant takeaway from this examination of the provided materials.